Jim Marrs is, without question, in my view, and that's not just me, the world's foremost expert on the JFK assassination, and his book Crossfire, which is going to be updated in the near future, is a definitive treatise on the whole thing. This is going to be a real fun program next Tuesday, hour 1. Abraham Bolden will be on, and tell us a little bit about Abe and his fascinating.
Abraham Bolden was personally selected by President John F. Kennedy to become the first black Secret Service agent. Okay? And that's a whole interesting story right there.
You bet.
And the fact that he broke the color barrier right back there in whenever it was, 1962, I think it was. And then he got sent to work out of Chicago and was part of the Secret Service effort that broke up a Kennedy assassination plot in Chicago.
See, right away. All right, hold it, folks. What you heard what Jim said. A Kennedy assassination plot in Chicago. Now, I'm sure most of you have already added 1 and 1. Say, they were after this guy, and that's two attempts we know about.
But now here's the thing that gets me. What's known about the Chicago plot, since it didn't happen, obviously we don't know all the details, but apparently the Secret Service got wind of it thanks to an FBI informant. But the only thing that's ever been made public of who this informant was his name was Lee. Oops. And of course, that immediately got my attention because from the very weekend of the Kennedy assassination, Lee Harvey Oswald's mother, Marguerite, and I met her, and I was in her home many times. In fact, she used to bug me with telephone calls and letters and stuff. And she, from the get-go, she insisted that her son was working for the United States government. And at the time of the Warren Commission, the Texas Attorney General said, well, we've developed information that he was working as a informant for the FBI.
Yep.
Just like Jack Ruby had been an informant for the FBI. Isn't that something? The man accused of killing the president and the man accused of killing the president's killer both had worked for the FBI. Does that begin to sound kind of familiar? Because anybody who's been keeping up with all the terrorist attacks in the United States, if you'll think about it, always involves a FBI undercover guy. Okay? Some kind of snitch, some kind of informant, usually a criminal who they let out of prison or they keep from going to prison in exchange for telling us where the terrorists are. So he goes and rounds up some goofballs, jacks them all up on, let's do something. Yeah, man, okay. Probably gives them booze, gives them money, even builds explosives, gives them the stuff. And then the FBI, luckily for public safety, busts those nasty old terrorists. And the public is stampeded further down the road because of terrorist activity. Same old stuff.
Useful idiots.
Useful idiots.
Yeah, well...
man, and we just keep falling for it, you know? It's just...
Well,
And the latest thing, Senator Rand Paul introduces a bill to do away with the TSA. Before they can consider that, there's another attempted underwear bombing, okay?
Yep.
And by the way, everybody, I hope you noticed that this time they made a real point to say, and this was a different type bomb, okay?
This was not. That's right. It wasn't a Haynes bomb. It was a Fruit of the Loom bomb.
It's a Fruit of the Loom. No, but there was a reason why they were careful to point out that this was a different type bomb, because more and more people were becoming aware of the fact that I'm telling you right now that the first underwear bomber, Ababoob or whatever his name was, there was never any danger, because although he had this plastic type explosive, PETN, in his underwear, it required a detonator.
Yeah.
You couldn't set it on fire with a match. You couldn't light it. You couldn't light it with a cigarette lighter. You had to have a detonator, and he didn't have a detonator. In fact, he was walked onto the plane with a well-dressed man who talked him past security, and it later came out in congressional testimony that the underwear bomber was going to be not granted a visa. He would not have been allowed to board that aircraft, but U.S. intelligence agencies forced the State Department to go ahead and issue him a visa and let him on.
They put him on it.
And they put him on there. It was all a put-up deal. It's all so phony
that's why
that it drives me
idiots.
nuts, and this is why I have absolutely no patience with the thieves and perverts and idiots that are manning the TSA. And I use that, I'm not just calling them names.
No, that's what they are.
They have been convicted of stealing. Yeah. They've been convicted of groping people. And
they have prior records, most of them.
They've got
not
prior
most of them.
records.
A lot of them.
They're just, not all of them, but a lot of them are just scum.
They're dregs.
Okay? And it's like, well, I can hear somebody in the bowels of the White House going, well, what are we going to do with these crumb bums? Let's form the TSA and give them government jobs.
They're actually
Get them off
perfect.
The streets.
They're perfect for the job because nobody with a conscience could do that kind of work.
Yeah, we're getting far afield, though. So, back to Abraham Bolden.
Well, let me go back to the part
in Chicago was thwarted thanks to
somebody named Lee. Now, all right, folks, ding, ding, ding. Somebody named Lee turned in a tip to the FBI that there was going to be an attempt on John F. Kennedy in Chicago. Lee. All right.
Yeah. And, I'm going to go ahead and go through this today. We're probably going to restate all this next.
We'll hear right from Abraham anyway. It's all right.
But see, this leads me to another dot to connect, which was the Warren Commission heard testimony from several people who said they had either cashed the check or been present when Lee Harvey Oswald cashed a check in the weeks preceding the assassination for about $179. Mm-hmm. Well, the Warren Commission said he was not known to have been making that kind of money, and so therefore they must have been mistaken. Well, I say the one thing I've learned in the Army and in the military and working in and around the government is the one thing they're really sticklers about is, I don't care if you are an undercover FBI informant, you have to pay your taxes, okay? So if you figure at that time, if he's making about $200 a month as an undercover agent and they took out the taxes, they'd come to about $179, wouldn't it? That's probably his take-home pay.
Right.
And so again, that it all fits, But
well, let's jump back to what you and I talked about earlier on this, and that is that if Lee Harvey Oswald turned in the tip to the FBI in Chicago that potentially saved President Kennedy's life, what does that make Lee Harvey Oswald?
Well, first let's carry it on through to Dallas, because according to Judith Very Baker, and there's a wonderful book out now by Ed Haslam telling her story. Mm-hmm. Haslam worked on it. It's her book, and it's called Me and Lee. And I would encourage everyone with a real deep interest in the assassination to read this, because it explains the very mysterious and largely unknown activities of Lee Harvey Oswald while he was in New Orleans in the summer of 1963.
Yeah. Didn't we have Haslam on the program?
Yes, you did. And as you recall, he told you about the adulteration of the polio vaccine.
Correct.
And how that they had a crash secret program going on, trying to figure out a way to stop the spread of cancer, because since they had started it with the simian immunization virus 40,
SV40,
which was adulterating the salt polio vaccine, which they gave to millions of Americans.
They figure they killed 20 to 40 million Americans with brain and kidney cancer from that contaminant.
Yeah. And by the way, that's not some conspiracy theory.
No, it's fact.
That is historical fact. It's been acknowledged. It's been covered in several different things.
Yeah.
But in the summer of '63, they were desperately trying to find out if they couldn't cure cancer. And as a result, they had these secret laboratories going on all around the country, and one of them was in New Orleans, being run by David Ferry, who had all these lab rat cages in his apartment, and was overseen by Dr. Mary Sherman, who's connected with Tulane University, and Dr. Alton Oxner and the American Cancer Society, and also involved Lee Harvey Oswald, who was slipping away from his job at Riley Coffee Company to go over there and do menial work like just clean up cages and stuff like that, take care of the dead mice. And they had a young girl who was kind of a whiz kid, who they had acting essentially as a lab assistant, and that was Judith Baker. And she and Oswald kind of got a thing going, and she kept her pay stubs. She can prove that she went to work at Riley Coffee Company the exact same day as Lee Harvey Oswald, and when he got fired, she got fired, and they left on the same day. So obviously there was a connection there. And her story is backed up by one of the of Oswald's supervisors there at the Riley Coffee Company, who told the Warren Commission, "Yeah, I never could find that guy. He never was around. And when I'd finally catch up with him, I'd say, 'Well, where you been?' He'd say, 'Well, I've just been around.' Well, according to Judith Baker, he's slipping away, slipping over to David Ferry's apartment and taking care of the secret cancer lab." So wait a minute. So he's working on this government project with David Ferry, who not only is connected to the CIA and the FBI, but also with organized crime, okay, because he was associated with Carlos Marcello. So here we have another nexus point between the mob and the CIA and the FBI and the government, okay? Nothing new there. That's all been established historical fact, too. So the thing is, what happened in Dallas? Well, Judith said that he called her from Dallas and said that they were planning to kill the president, and she begged him to get out. He said, "Don't worry, I'm taking care of this. I need to stay because
Talking about
if I try
Lee.
to leave."
Talking about Lee. Talking about Lee.
I'm talking about Lee Harvey Oswald. Said, if I stay here, maybe I can prevent this. And if he indeed was the informant that had stopped the assassination attempt in Chicago, then here he was, kind of on the inside, and he's reporting back to his superiors at the FBI. And by the way, that brings us to the story of William Walter, who was a employee of the FBI in New Orleans, and he said the night before the assassination, a teletype came through, and that it was saying there is a plot to kill Kennedy in Dallas tomorrow, and steps should be taken. And he knows that because he copied it all down and sent it out to other stations. And then after the assassination, that particular teletype went missing and has never been seen again. And, of course, the FBI officially denies it. But to this day, he still says, so I think Oswald tried to warn his superiors that there was going to be the assassination attempt in Dallas. But, see, he never realized that he was
being set up,
whistleblowing and tipping off the people who were behind it.
Unreal.
And so it's a fascinating story, but if this is all true, and I just think there's a lot of substance to it, and it flies directly in the face of everything we've been told about Lee Harvey Oswald, that he was a loner, pro-communist, blah, blah, blah.
They smeared that guy so fast. They had this. Just like
they had a cover
9/11.
story.
They had the whole, like 9/11. They had the whole thing ready to go.
Exactly. They had it all laid out ahead of time, and they just ran it in. And here's a couple of points of proof. Less than 2 hours after the assassination, according to FBI documents, J. Edgar Hoover called Bobby Kennedy and said, "We have our man in Dallas. He's Lee Harvey Oswald. He's an ex-Marine. He defected to Russia." Had a whole background run on him and said he's a mean-spirited individual in the category of a nut. So he already had this lone nut assassin thing established for Lee Harvey Oswald less than 2 hours after the shooting. And meanwhile, in Dallas, Oswald had probably only arrived at the police station less than 30 minutes before, because he was arrested at about 1:40. It took him 20, 30 minutes to get downtown. And, so it's like 2:15. So at the time that Hoover's on the telephone to Attorney General Robert Kennedy saying, "We have our man in Dallas," gives a whole rundown of his background, says he's a lone nut case. The Dallas police are saying, "Who are you?" Because Oswald was carrying two sets of identification. One says he's Lee Harvey Oswald. The other says he's Alex James Heidel. And he's being uncooperative. He said, well, you're the cops, figure it out. So when the Dallas cops on the scene were not even sure who they had in custody, Hoover had the whole rundown on him.
Yeah.
How's that for fast work?
Pretty disgusting fast work.
It's absolutely just absolutely incredible. Absolutely incredible.
Who killed J.D. Tippit?
Well, I don't know, but I do know who didn't, and that was Lee Harvey Oswald.
Mm-hmm.
Because I know there were 3 witnesses. I talked personally to 2 of them. Jack Davis, who was a young kid at the time, in the Texas Theater and encountered Oswald, who came and sat next to him, didn't say anything, he got up and left. He thought that was a little strange, as we all would. And Butch Burroughs, who was the assistant manager at the Texas Theater, who said he sold popcorn to Lee Harvey Oswald shortly after 1 p.m. So in other words, 3 witnesses place Oswald in the Texas Theater not more than about 10 minutes after 1. Well, Tippit was not shot until about 1:15 or 1:20. It blocks away. You can't be in 2 places at the same time.
No.
So whoever shot Tippit, it was not Lee Harvey Oswald.
I wonder...
And yet, see, here's how they worked us, okay? For so many years, the idea was, well, he shot the cop. He must have killed the president. Or why else would he have shot the cop?
Yeah.
Well, now we can just reverse that and say, well, he didn't shoot the cop. Whoa, maybe he didn't shoot the president. See, but nobody gets this stuff because the media is under the total control of 4 major corporations.
Right.
Okay? And they will not go there. They won't tell you anything. They won't tell you so much. They won't tell you that Ron Paul already has enough delegates that he probably has enough to throw the Republican convention into an open convention. All right. They also won't tell you that he has not dropped out of the race. He simply stopped spending money on campaigning. Okay. He's still very much there. You hadn't heard the last of him, but of course, according to media, he's a non-person. He doesn't exist. And here's another story. And you're probably aware of this, Jeff, but I bet a lot of your audience is not. What do you do in a country when everybody's suffering under terrible debt load, and most of it's just crap, you know? It's digits in a computer that's representing money made out of paper. It's not backed by anything. And all of these bad mortgages that they have out there. Well, in Denmark, they're forgiving the mortgages. They just said, okay, all right, this was a bad deal. The banks made bad loans. You just stay in your house and you don't have to pay anymore. Hey, wouldn't that be a nice deal?
Sounds damn civilized, doesn't it?
Damn civilized. And it's working.
Yeah,
their economy's improving.
And their economy's not dying.
But over here, you don't even get to hear about this successful alternative.
No, I think I saw
paying more money
story
to the international bankers because the news media won't talk about it.
I saw one story about it.
It's absolutely incredible. It makes me ashamed for my profession.
Shame for our profession? Our profession's gone, friend. It's not. These are just whores, prostitutes, they're just paid to lie, paid to regurgitate. I'm sorry to say it. There aren't any journalists left, not many. And if they are out there, they don't last long.
The British have a better handle on it. Over here we call them newsmen and news anchors. Over in the UK they're called presenters.
Right.
And that's all they are. They're presenters. They present you with whatever their masters give them to read.
They're actors.
Actors,
doing a script.
Yeah, absolutely. So anyways, you can see there's so much going on. And the Abraham Bolden story is just
we'll have a great time
with
that.
And it fits so perfectly in because he will tell you he got in trouble with the Secret Service for blowing the whistle on him for doing things like they just got caught at recently. You know, using taxpayer money to hire hookers and slough off on the job. In fact, most people don't realize this, but the detail that was assigned to protect President Kennedy was up until after 5 o'clock in the morning,
partying?
The morning of the assassination, drinking vodka at a club in downtown Fort Worth called The Cellar. And I know that happened because I knew personally Pat Kirkwood. I was in the cellar myself, and I got served some of that drinks there too. But at the time, they said, well, that can't happen because the club didn't have an alcohol permit. Well, technically, that's true. But if you were a cop or a reporter or a city official
Secret
or a county
Service.
official or anybody with any standing in the community, old Pat would give you a drink, an alcohol drink, and he was more than happy to keep those Secret Service agents loaded with salty dicks until 5 in the morning. And that's why when the shooting started in Dealey Plaza, the only Secret Service agent to really respond was Clint Hill, who jumped off the car, ran up, tried to jump on the presidential limousine.
Mm-hmm.
And here's the clincher. Clint Hill wasn't even supposed to be there. He was added at the last minute because Jackie Kennedy, whom he was assigned to, said, well, I really like Clint Hill. I want him along too. So at the last minute, he's included in, and he's the only one that responds when the president's being shot.
Wow. Another amazing. So, we got to take a break here, but I wish that somebody would make at least a 1 hour documentary with you on this, an honest documentary, 2 1 hours, and just go through it. Just a little parts that you have presented here, take Crossfire, whatever. Just the things you've told us tonight in this first half hour, Jim, change the whole story.
The whole thing's topsy-turvy. It's totally opposite from what most everybody thinks. But at least the only good thing is that here, almost 50 years later, the majority of people in this country, according to the polls,
they know
are
something's wrong.
Are supporting. They're behind me because they realized there was a conspiracy. They don't know all the details. They don't understand how it all worked, and most of them still think Oswald did something. And he was involved. He was not just some innocent guy off the street.
Let's touch on that in a minute when we come back here. I want to see how Oswald got from the book depository, if he was there at all, to the theater, and see what you think about that. We'll do that in just a sec as we continue. Okay, and back with Jim. And I'll say this just as a generic kind of a proclamation. You learned more about the John F. Kennedy murder in the last half an hour with Jim Marrs than most of you have probably learned in your lifetime. And I'm not kidding. That's the truth. Now, I'd urge you to read Crossfire. Jim's going to update it in the next year or so, and it will be and remain the definitive and most important book on the murder. And we've had wonderful guests in the past. Ed Haslam. We just had the author Peter Janney of Mary's Mosaic, another wonderful period expose. And I'm just amazed at what we heard in the last half hour. And we've had programs on this subject with Jim before, and it's the same thing. Well, if you can find another talk radio program that has more important, more relevant, more real information, let me know. I don't like talk radio much, and I think most of you agree. It's a wasteland, but what we just learned is amazing. All right, well, how did Lee Harvey Oswald get to the theater and have the composure enough to go in there and buy some damn popcorn and go sit in the theater?
Because there was two people that entered the Texas theater. One was Oswald shortly after 1 p.m., and somebody else entered shortly after 1:30 p.m., and that's who led the cops to the theater. The whole thing, it's an amazing story once you know the details. But see, the problem is the media would never tell you the facts. They only tell you the controversy. Well, it's controversial, and one person, and there's so many theories, and the only people that they give any real time and space to is people like Vincent Bugliosi, who published 1,700 pages filled with just nothing. 2.5 pages was a self-admitted, made-up conversation between Jack Ruby and some fictional mafia character he calls Guido, and it sounds like a bad Sopranos script. It's, hey, Jack, we want you to whack Oswald. Come on, man.
Really?
It's incredible, and all he can do is just go around and call the people who are trying to point out the facts of the case conspiracy theorists and cuckoos and nutballs and all kinds of names, which is just, typical debate tactic. Cannot argue against your opponent's argument, then you just argue against your opponent. You just call him names and say he's a nut, a crackpot, and he doesn't know what he's talking about.
Attack the messenger.
All the thing in the book.
Always.
I'll tell you what I'm really gratified about is that since Crossfire was published back in the 80s,
Unreal.
Yeah, I'm going to be bringing it up to date and bring up some new material, but, basically nothing has come out that refutes the conclusions I made in the 80s, which was the conclusions I had in the 70s. Okay? In fact, I published a front page newspaper article in 1975 when they were first starting to talk about convening a congressional panel to reinvestigate the Kennedy assassination, and then later they added in the Robert Kennedy assassination.
I remember that, yeah.
And the Dr. Martin Luther King assassination. And I wrote a front page article at that point, said if they will really do their job, they will find that there was a coup d'etat in the United States in 1963. That was 1975. Of course, I was just the conspiracy theorist and the nut. But back to your question. Basically, apparently, here's what happened. Oswald indeed worked at the Texas School Book Depository, but when he was questioned by the Dallas police, where were you at the time of the shooting, he said he was in the downstairs lunchroom. And they said, was there anybody there with you? And he said, yeah, there was these two colored boys, that's what they called them in those days, who worked with me, and one of them's name was Junior, and the other was short, kind of fat guy, but I don't know his name. Okay, well, Junior Jarman and Harold Norman were indeed in the downstairs lunchroom eating their lunch just prior to the arrival of the motorcade. Now, my question, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, is how could Oswald have correctly identified these two guys in the downstairs lunchroom if he's up on the 6th floor shooting at the president? Okay? So then he says that his immediate supervisor, he meaning Lee Oswald, told the police that his immediate supervisor told him that there wasn't going to be any more work that day, just go on home. And so then, interestingly enough, he says as he was leaving the book depository building, a young man in a suit and tie and a coat ran up to him, showed him a book of identification, that was his words, said he was with the Secret Service and wanted to know where the nearest telephone was. Okay, now here's Oswald, who supposedly has just shot the President of the United States. He's trying to make his getaway, and who we're told less than an hour later shoots down a policeman on the streets of South Dallas, and he directs the guy to the telephone and actually said he stood there to make sure the guy got to the telephone.
Jeez.
Now, wait a minute. Now, the clincher there is that several newsmen, Pierce Allman being one of them, Robert McNeil being another one, have both said, well, you know, I encountered Lee Harvey Oswald coming out of the School Book Depository, and the official word was that he had actually encountered a news reporter and had mistaken him for a Secret Service agent, you know? Well, the problem is both of these guys, Pierce Allman and Robert McNeil, both.
Is that the Robert McNeil?
Yes, of PBS. So you listen to them closely, and they say, well, I don't actually remember that happening, but several weeks later, the Secret Service came to me and said, hey, you encountered the assassin as he was trying to leave the building. Okay, and why did they spread this story to two separate newsmen? Three, actually. I think there were three newsmen they tried to tell that same story to. So they'd all go on the record and say, yes, I think I encountered because otherwise we got a real problem there if Oswald encountered a Secret Service agent. And yet, according to his own description, he showed him a book of identification. That was his words. Well, you know, I was a news reporter at that time. All I carried was a press card. I didn't have a book of identification, but who carries a book of identification? FBI agent, Secret Service agent.
Yeah, I like a little booklet.
Little leather booklets, little leather folders with badge and ID in it. But of course, they couldn't admit that Oswald might have encountered a Secret Service agent minutes after the shooting, so they had to twist the whole story around.
So Jim, excuse me. So we think he was in the book depository building for whatever reason.
Yeah, well, he worked there.
Lee Harvey Oswald was employed there.
Yes, moving boxes all that morning up on the 6th floor and other places. They were moving the boxes from one end of the building to the other so they could tear up the old floor and lay down some new floor. So that's why. Then later when they said, well, we found his fingerprints on these boxes up on the 6th floor, big deal. Yeah. It would have been highly unusual if they had not found his fingerprints up there.
Yeah.
Okay, so he leaves the book depository, and there's even questions about what happened then, but he shows up at his rooming house right about
Excuse
1
me,
o'clock.
he left the book depository after the shooting, right?
Oh,
Or
yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
so he heard all the ruckus and commotion, and he
Oh, in fact, okay, well, let me back up. There was a Dallas policeman who was on a three-wheel motorcycle, and he was riding in the motorcade, and he hears shots, and he sees pigeons rise off the roof of the school book depository building, so his immediate thought was maybe there was a sniper on the roof of the depository building. So he guns his motorcycle, races up to the front of the building, jumps off, runs inside, immediately encounters Roy Truly, the building superintendent, and said, I need to get to the roof. So they go over and try the elevators, but the elevators are all open on the 5th floor, and the elevators aren't operating. Okay, somebody left the gates open. So they start racing up the stairs. He gets to the 2nd floor where there's a lunchroom there, and he sees a guy stand there holding a Coca-Cola or a soft drink in his hand, calmly, coolly, and he runs in and points a gun at him. And Truly said, that's okay. He works here. That's Lee Oswald. And the Warren Commission thoughtfully even gave us a time frame. A minute and a half after the shooting, the policeman and Truly encounter Oswald down on the 2nd floor, almost the ground floor.
drinking a Coke.
With a Coke bottle in his hand, calm, cool, and collected. On the opposite side, yet, so we're expected to believe, because Oswald was supposedly shooting from the southeast corner of the school book depository, and yet he, according to the official story, he ran clear to the northwest corner of the book depository building, stashed the rifle behind some boxes, and then ran back down the other way and got on the stairs, which had heavy fire doors on every landing, crashed through these fire doors, ran down, 5, 6 flights of steps to get to the lunchroom, got in there, fumbled for change, put change in the machine, got a Coke out of the machine, and was standing there calm, cool, and collected when Truly and the policeman came in. All right. Now, there are those who argue that Oswald, he wasn't holding, he didn't get a Coke. He wasn't holding a Coke in his hand. Well, okay, that's because the Warren Commission didn't make any mention of that. And when you go back and you find the typed up report by the three-wheel policeman, it does not mention the drink, but when you find his handwritten report, which was written on the spur of the moment and before he typed it all up, it said he was standing there holding a Coke in his hand. And then you go to the testimony of one of the book depository ladies who said shortly after the shooting, she looked up at Lee Oswald, and she was on like the ground floor or the 2nd floor, and Lee Oswald was walking through her office holding a Coke in his hand. So I ask you, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, did he have a Coke in his hand or not? Of course he did. But see, you never get told these things. No, you never get told these things.
No.
So Oswald leaves the depository, and the next thing we know, there's even controversy of how he got back to his room in the house, but I won't bore you with that. But right about 1 o'clock, he gets to his room in the house, and he hustles in. His landlady is sitting there watching the TV about how there's been a shooting in the motorcade. They hadn't even announced Kennedy was dead yet. Oswald doesn't say anything. He just hustles back to his little room. And about that time, she hears a horn toot, beep, beep. And she looks out front, and there's a Dallas police car out front. And she's not sure what it was, but she recalls there was the number 1 and the number 0. Well, car 10 is the number of the car that the police officer, Tippett, was in.
JD was in car 10?
Okay. So then, about that time, the cop car, after tooting the horn, slides on down. His rooming house was like the second house from the corner on Zang's. So the cop car kind of slowly pulls down and then makes the corner on Zang's, just as Oswald comes hustling back out of his room with his jacket on, doesn't say a word, hustles out the door, turns towards Zang's. She looks out the window, sees him heading towards Zang's, and goes back to watching television. Well, supposedly, according to the official version, he ran or walked all the way from this Beckley Street boarding house, umpteen blocks, to the Texas Theater. And yet, let me assure you, this was a Friday afternoon. This was pre-air conditioning. It was Indian summer. It was actually a really beautiful day after the storm kind of cleared away that morning. And people were all out on the stoops and on the lawns, and there was excitement in the air. It was Texas Football Friday, and the president had been in town, and some people were beginning to hear that there had been a shooting in the motorcade. People were out and about. This is like 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and they have never found not even one person who says, "Oh, I saw a guy running up the street," or "I saw Oswald and he was moving towards the theater." It didn't happen. I maintain he went around the corner on Zangs, got in J.D. Tippett's police car, and Tippett drove him to the theater and let him out, where he arrived shortly after 1 p.m., bought a ticket, went in, sat over near Jack Davis, I think trying to make an intelligence contact, failed to make contact, gets up, goes out, buys popcorn from Butch Burroughs. Again, no more than 10 minutes after 1. The show had just started, and after the newsreels and the coming attractions, that would have made it about 1:10. Goes back in, and then goes over and sits in the center section, third row, third seat, which is exactly the type of methodology you'd have if you're trying to make an intelligence contact. And so there he sits, munching his popcorn, I guess. And about 1:30, well, let's back up. Meanwhile, Tippett pulls up the street across catty corner from the Texas Theater and stops at the Big Town Record Store and goes in to make a phone call. Now, he's been in there on a regular basis. He knows them. They know him. But he goes in there. Something's on his mind. He doesn't say anything to anybody. He just rushes to the telephone, tried to dial a number. He wasn't there very long, and apparently did not reach whoever he's trying to reach. Slammed down the phone, ran out, jumped back in his car. And we know this happened because right at this time, about 1 o'clock, is when the Dallas police dispatcher tried to radio Tippett in his squad car and got no answer. So he's out of his car. Well, he's at the Big Town Record Store. So he goes back, didn't make a phone call, and jumped his car. He takes off, and he turns and makes a U-turn and is heading up 10th Street. And then he's heading up and he gets past Patton Street, and he's on a direct line within a few blocks of Jack Ruby's apartment. But apparently he sees somebody walking down the street. Somebody hails him. So he pulls over, and at this point it's like about 1:15, between 1:10 and 1:15. He pulls over to the right-hand curb. The window on his squad car is up, and something was said with the guy outside. And whatever it wasn't the right thing, because Tippett gets out of his squad car and pulls his gun, okay, and starts to walk around the left front fender of the car when somebody over here on the street side shoots him. First bullet hits him in the heart, and he's dead when he hits the ground with his gun out of the holster lying under the body, which means he had pulled his gun, right? Okay, then, according to the House committee, whoever shot Tippett, this was not simply to get away from a cop, because if you do that, you shoot, the cop falls down, what do? You run like hell. No, whoever shot Tippett in the heart then walks over and puts a coup de grace in his head at a close range. Whoever shot Tippett wanted Tippett dead, okay? And then they leave, and and then they unload their gun, leave these shell casings lying at the scene. That's a real smart crook. And then people are starting to come out and look around and wonder, so that whoever shot Tippett takes off running in the general direction of the Texas School Book Depository. The
theater.
Texas Theater. And so, but he doesn't get there. Actually, in fact, at the last word was he had entered a church there, okay? And so they called all the cops, and they were getting ready to converge on this church when a Johnny Brewer, a shoe salesman at a shoe store on about a few stores up from the Texas Theater, heard sirens, looked out front, saw a guy, young white guy, duck into the alcove of his store, acting like he was hiding from the cops, acting suspicious. The cop car screeches on by. This guy turns and starts walking up towards the Texas Theater. Brewer, who ducked back into the shoe store, I think probably got back in there and hollered, "Hey, watch the store." and then went back out and was going to follow this guy, see where he's going. But when he came back out on the sidewalk, looked down at the Texas Theater, there was nobody there. So he goes down to the Texas Theater and asks Julia Postal, the ticket seller, says, "Hey, did anybody just buy a ticket and go in the theater?" And she said, "No." He said, "Well, then I think somebody just sneaked in the theater." All right. Now we go to Butch Burroughs, same time period, right about 1:30. There were two double doors, one for the outside and then a little foyer and then to the inside lobby. And oddly enough, between the two doors are stairs that lead to the balcony. So he hears the outer doors open at about 1:30, and he walks around the counter to take the ticket of whoever's coming in, but nobody comes in the inner doors. So about that time, Julia Postal and Brewer, the shoe store salesman, they come in and said, "Hey, did somebody just come in here?" He said, "Well, I heard the doors open, but nobody came in through the inner door." Said he must be in the balcony. So he said, "Well, call the cops." So they called the cops. All right, now here's the president of the United States has been assassinated in their town. One of their own police officers had been shot several blocks away. And they get a call at the dispatcher to say that somebody sneaked in the theater without buying a ticket. And on the basis of that, they rush 15 squad cars, district attorneys, and county sheriffs, and even men claiming to be CIA, and they all surround the Texas Theater. And so they go in, and they take Johnny Brewer. And picture this, here's a theater that holds 900 people, and there's only about 20 people in it, scattered all around. They turn on the house lights, but the movie's still running. They walk down, they get on the stage, Brewer's up there with them. They're saying, "Do you see the guy that slipped in?" He looks around, spots somebody back at the back, and says, "I think that's him back there." Now, what do you think they do then? They go rush back, grab the guy, right? Nope, they didn't do that. They started working their way back each aisle. "Sir, excuse me, sir, stand up, come around here, let's see some ID." And they just keep working their way back towards the back of the theater, giving Oswald every opportunity to make a run for it. And I think the plan was they're going to shoot him trying to escape, and then it's all wrapped up.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
Okay? Except when and the cops that were in on it and ready to shoot him, it got fouled up because Officer McDonald showed up, and I don't think he was part of the plot. He just showed up, and he goes up there, and he's the first one to approach Oswald. And he said, Oswald said, "Well, it's all over now," or something like that, stood up and pulled this .38 pistol from his belt, and McDonald said he heard the gun snap. As he held it against his midriff. And this was all told to the Associated Press and was published the next day. All right? And McDonald said he heard the gun snap, and he thought, "Oh, my God, am I lucky, that it didn't go off." And so at this time, several of them jump on Oswald, and they haul him out the front door of the...
The gun misfired?
Theater. The gun misfired. More on that in a minute. So... they grab Oswald and they haul him out the front door of the school book depository where a crowd had gathered, and there are all kinds of photographs of them hauling Oswald out of the theater, and they put him in a squad car and they head for town. This would have been about 1:40, 1:45. Okay? Meanwhile, Bernard O'Hare, who had the hobby store next to the theater, said he told me he heard the commotion, went out, stood at the edge of the crowd to see what was going on, and we have a photograph of him standing in the crowd in front of the school book depository. And then he said, but he couldn't see anything much, so he went back in his store and walked through and went back into the alleyway in the back, and he said there were police cars lined up all down the alleyway, and as he walked a few feet towards the Texas Theater, he saw the back door of the Texas Theater slam open, and these cops were dragging out a young, slender white guy, that looks like he'd been in a fight, and they hustled him around and threw him in a squad car, and they took off for town. And for all the years until I talked to him, O'Hare had believed he saw the arrest of Lee Harvey Oswald because he heard he was arrested at the theater and hauled out, and he didn't pay much more attention to it. And when I showed him the pictures of him bringing Oswald out the front of the theater, he asked the $64,000 question. He said, well, then who did I see getting brought out the rear of the Texas Theater? So, see, there's something else going on there. Somebody led the cops to the Texas Theater,
Yes.
went in the balcony, and I have 2 Dallas arrest reports, 2 separate ones, that both say that the suspect was arrested in the balcony of the Texas Theater.
I seem to remember hearing that.
Yeah,
somewhere.
no, he was arrested on the ground floor. The look-alike was arrested in the balcony. The guy that took out the back door was arrested in the balcony. Now, the whole thing about the pistol firing, because this supposedly is the pistol he has just used to kill Officer J.D. Tippit, right? Well, when the FBI got it, they wanted to try to test it, check the ballistics. They found it had a bent firing pin. That's why it wouldn't go off.
Huh.
And
That's too weird.
so he couldn't have killed J.D. Tippit with it.
Well, it doesn't sound like it sounded like that. You could. Was that a rifle from across the street that took Tippit down the first time? And why shoot him?
No, it was a
It was a handgun. Somebody on the sidewalk.
Handgun. Yeah, I think the bottom line here is that once you suspend belief as to the official legend, the cover story that has been put down quite effectively, because I mean it's even Stephen King writes a whole novel about a guy trying to stop Lee Harvey Oswald from firing those shots from the 6th floor building, and it's just been so ingrained in so many people that you talk about a divisive instrument. This is it. You've
Sure.
got, and the one thing that everybody agrees with on the Kennedy assassination, regardless of your belief, is the fact that it's controversial. Okay? Well, I submit, why should it be controversial? I mean, we've all heard of Mr. Oswalds, hadn't we? I think it was Leonard Oswalds. He's the guy that shot McKinley, and President McKinley. And they investigated it, checked it all out. He indeed was a disturbed individual. And so that was the end of that. If Oswald was a disturbed individual and the assassination of President Kennedy was just kind of a quirk of fate and a tragic meeting between a mentally unstable person and the great leader, we shouldn't be hearing any more about it. But it's
Correct.
constant. It just goes on and on and on, because it's all built on a tissue of lies, and everything that we've been taught is wrong. And I say if, because there is still some question. The thing that is unquestionable is that there has never yet, despite the Warren Commission, despite the House Select Committee on Assassinations, despite TV documentaries and docudramas, and despite the Assassination Records Review Board, which was mandated by Congress to dig out material on the Kennedy assassination in the wake of the Oliver Stone movie back in the early 90s, and they did. They dug out an immense amount of material. But, their mandate never said what to do with it. So they never tried to put it together and say, here's what all this means. And so as a result, to this very day, there has never been an honest and in-depth investigation of the Kennedy assassination.
No.
And that's why most people, the reason it appears to be controversial, because it's not really, but it appears to be controversial because on the one hand, you've got a good number of people who still cling to the government's official pronouncement that Oswald did it all by himself, and they believe and trust the government. They are quickly becoming in the minority these days, but they're still there. And then on the other hand, you have the people who've actually studied the case. And that big, huge gulf between those two groups is what causes, and is apparent to everyone, that there is a big controversy going on.
Sure.
And that's what it's all about. Now, if the truth of the matter, if Oswald was in the downstairs, if Oswald did not fire a rifle that day, keep in mind that the police gave him a paraffin test on his hands and face that clearly showed he had not fired a rifle that day. And yet when they made reference to that on the Dallas police evidence sheet, when it was published in the Warren Commission, they had deleted that information.
That's crucial. That literally turns the man out on the street innocent. Right then and there.
I wouldn't. I wouldn't. I'm trying to be balanced.
If there's no powder, James,
I wouldn't say it was crucial. Okay, there can be arguments made against the paraffin test, but the point is they didn't try to make any arguments about it. They just deleted any mention of it. We just won't talk about that. Okay, and so just hidden away, things hidden away, missing evidence, fabricated evidence, suppressed evidence, altered evidence. A suppression of evidence, it's all there. And this was all done at the level of the federal government, okay? So, but if all that is taken into consideration, and you look at the full facts of the matter, it really turns the whole thing on its ear, because if indeed the informant that stopped the assassination attempt in Chicago was Lee, and if that was Lee Harvey Oswald, and if he indeed was involved in the plot but tried to stop it with a telegram, and a letter to the Dallas police a couple of weeks before, signed A.J. Heidel, warning that Kennedy was going to be killed in Dallas.
Okay, whoa. That's 2 times we have at least circumstantial evidence to suggest that Lee Harvey Oswald could be a hero.
He very possibly was not the heel in the assassination. He was the hero. He tried to stop it. And yet, for his trouble, just like today, Obama came in promising more transparency in government and said he was not going to continue the Bush administration's policy of prosecuting and persecuting whistleblowers who tried to reveal wrongdoing within the government. And yet, the Obama administration has now outdone the Bush administration as far as punishing whistleblowers. All right? So it's amazing, but here was the guy, the hero, who was trying to stop it all, and they tagged him as the patsy.
Do you think that how well thought out was the grab of Oswald in the Texas theater, or was it just a convenient development that fell into their hands?
No. It was all planned, because he got the job at the Scuba Depository thanks to Ruth Payne, who was
I'm talking about him getting to the theater.
Oh, well, that was part of some plot. I think he was picked up by J.T. Tippett. I think he was driven to the theater where he thought he was going to make some kind of intelligence contact. Because I've already mentioned how he came and sat down next to the kid and didn't say anything, probably waiting for him to say the spring came early this year. And he was supposed to say, yes, but the ducks are flying south, or whatever, Now, here's another little tidbit. I know you don't know this, but this is another tidbit that convinces me that he was working in some kind of intelligence op. When Oswald was arrested, he had some very unusual things on him. He had a little piece of paper that listed all of his schools he'd gone to and the Army bases he'd been stationed.
Well, we never leave home without that.
Now, wait a minute. I know what schools I went to. I know what military bases I was assigned to. Why has he got that? He also had a top from a Cox's department store box. Not the box, just a top. Okay? And I forget now, there's 2 or 3 other little items that just didn't make any sense, Well, wait a minute. If you know spycraft, you know that when you meet your intelligence contacts and you give the password, the moon is blue tonight, well, then you also have to show your bona fides or your bona fides, okay, which is little nondescript things that you would have on you, so if you're arrested, doesn't make any sense, doesn't arouse any suspicion, but you can show those, and they know that you're the person that they are scheduled to meet.
Fascinating.
The whole thing's and it's a morass, because the deeper into it you go, the more convoluted it gets, and that's why, so many people just finally throw up their hands and say, oh man, that's it, I just, hurts my brain.
So this is CIA planning.
Oh, yeah.
For maybe a year.
This is very careful and deliberate planning.
Maybe a year. Who knows? And then what was the time frame between Dallas, back up now and go to the Chicago issue, and Lee, somebody turned in a tip? How many months?
Okay. I'm going to have to look that one up.
We'll just take a guess.
Let's take a break.
All right. Well,
we take a break, and I can find that out for you, but I'm going to have to look it up.
Well, actually, I think we got to wait for the computer on this, but go ahead and look it up. It's all right.
Well, I can find it here pretty quick. That's you remember when I'm always telling you, I don't know everything, but I know where to go find it.
Well, that's better. You know everything, you start losing it after a while. You can dig the stuff up and have it 100% right. That'll be interesting because let's say it's 6 months early. That shows
no, I don't think it was that. I think it was, well, just a minute. I'm almost here.
Yeah, maybe 3 months.
All right.
See, the point of all this is
November the 2nd. November the 2nd.
Oh, they had 3 weeks.
Yeah.
So the point of this is,
according to Bolden, the Chicago Secret Service office received a teletype from the FBI shortly before Kennedy's November the 2nd visit, warning an assassination attempt would be carried out in that city by a 4-man Cuban hit squad armed with high-powered rifles. Bolden said the entire office was involved in this matter, but that it was kept top secret. Kennedy's Chicago trip was canceled, although the House Select Committee on Assassinations could not determine the cause of the cancellation.
Well, all right, so the point is, whoever was behind this ultimate plan to kill John Kennedy had made at least 2 plans to do so. He was a dead man.
Well, they also planned to get him in Miami.
There's 3.
Where he canceled the motorcade. He was supposed to meet with the Cuban exile leaders in a football stadium down there. And they got word that there was going to be an assassination attempt there, so they canceled the motorcade, and he flew into this stadium by helicopter. And even then, some of my sources that were involved in that stuff down there said even then they started to make an attempt to use like a bazooka to bring down his helicopter.
Really?
Yeah.
Be an RPG now, but
yeah, it'd be an RPG today.
So
there were, but see, here's the whole thing. You have to again put it. Now let's broaden the context, Jim. This was November of 1963, just 1 month away from 1964, which was the election year, which means that the press coverage on Kennedy would double up. Everybody would be, more interested in what he was doing, where is he going, what is he staying.
Way harder.
And so they're on a time frame. They got to get it done before the first of 1964. And the Texas trip was his last scheduled trip.
He had to know. He had to know they were after him.
Oh, he knew. In fact, he was quoted as saying, I think perhaps to Brother Bobby, when they were clowning around at one time, he said, "Oh, it wouldn't be hard to get me. All you have to do is get somebody with a high-powered rifle up in a building." How's that for premonition?
Pretty sad.
Yep.
Pretty damn
sad. But here's another thing, though, and I will say this. I don't know this for a fact, but based on everything I know, I think Kennedy was a product of his time, just like we were all products of our time. We know what we know and what we've lived through, and we know how the context is the context that we and our parents have shaped, And I think that Kennedy knew that he was in a dangerous position. I think he knew that there were forces arrayed against him. His favorite movie was 7 Days in May, which was all about a military coup in the United States. I think he knew that all this was possible, but for all of that, he was a World War II guy. He had served in the war. And I believe that he was thoroughly imbued with the old-time patriotic view of the United States, and I don't think that he ever, in his heart of hearts, really thought that they would really pull off a coup d'etat in this country. And nobody else did either. That's why it's taken us so long to come to grips with this, because most people didn't want to admit that could even happen.
Too close to the war.
In fact, I think it was Alan Dulles, perhaps, one of the Warren Commission members, while they were deliberating, they said, well, it's important that we show the world that the United States is not just another banana republic. Unfortunately, we're just another banana republic.
Exactly right. That's a remarkable thing.
Isn't that something? Well, yeah, that's going to be quite a program with Abraham Bolden on there, so I hope everybody's listening tonight will be sure and listen in.
All right. Well, thanks, Jim, for staying over. That was just really amazing. Jim Marrs is, without question, in my view, and that's not just me, the world's foremost expert on the JFK assassination, and his book Crossfire, which is going to be updated in the near future, is a definitive treatise on the whole thing. This is going to be a real fun program next Tuesday, hour 1. Abraham Bolden will be on, and tell us a little bit about Abe. And it's fascinating.
Abraham Bolden was personally selected by President John F. Kennedy to become the first black Secret Service agent. Okay? And that's a whole interesting story right there.
You bet.
And the fact that he broke the color barrier right back there in, whenever it was, 1962, I think it was. And then he got sent to work out of Chicago and was part of the Secret Service effort that broke up a Kennedy assassination plot in Chicago.
See, right away. All right, hold it, folks. What you heard what Jim said. A Kennedy assassination plot in Chicago. Now, I'm sure most of you have already added 1 and 1. Say, oh, they were after this guy, and that's two attempts we know about.
But now here's the thing that gets me. What's known about the Chicago plot, since it didn't happen, obviously we don't know all the details, but apparently the Secret Service got wind of it thanks to an FBI informant. But the only thing that's ever been made public of who this informant was his name was Lee. Oops. And of course, that immediately got my attention because from the very weekend of the Kennedy assassination, Lee Harvey Oswald's mother, Marguerite, and I met her. I was in her home many times. In fact, she used to bug me with telephone calls and letters and stuff. And and how that they had a crash secret program going on, trying to figure out a way to stop the spread of cancer, because since they had started it with the simian immunization virus 40,
SV40,
which was adulterating the salt polio vaccine, which they gave to millions of Americans.
They figure they killed 20 to 40 million Americans with brain and kidney cancer from that contaminant.
Yeah. And by the way, that's not some conspiracy theory.
No, it's fact.
That is historical fact. It's been acknowledged. It's been covered in several different things.
Yeah.
But in the summer of '63, they were desperately trying to find out if they couldn't cure cancer. And as a result, they had these secret laboratories going on all around the country, and one of them was in New Orleans, being run by David Ferry, who had all these lab rat cages in his apartment, and was overseen by Dr. Mary Sherman, who's connected with Tulane University, and Dr. Alton Oxner and the American Cancer Society, and also involved Lee Harvey Oswald, who was slipping away from his job at Riley Coffee Company to go over there and do menial work like just clean up cages and stuff like that, take care of the dead mice. And they had a young girl who was kind of a whiz kid, who they had acting essentially as a lab assistant, and that was Judith Baker. And she and Oswald kind of got a thing going, and she kept her pay stubs. She can prove that she went to work at Riley Coffee Company the exact same day as Lee Harvey Oswald, and when he got fired, she got fired, and they left on the same day. So obviously there was a connection there. And her story is backed up by one of the of Oswald's supervisors there at the Riley Coffee Company, who told the Warren Commission, I never could find that guy. He never was around. And when I'd finally catch up with him, I'd say, well, where you been? He'd say, I've just been around. Well, according to Judith Baker, he's slipping away, slipping over to David Ferry's apartment and taking care of the secret cancer lab. So wait a minute. So he's working on this government project. And, I'm going to go ahead and go through this today. We're probably going to restate all this next.
We'll hear right from Abraham anyway. It's all right.
But see, this leads me to another dot to connect, which was the Warren Commission heard testimony from several people who said they had either cashed the check or been present when Lee Harvey Oswald cashed a check in the weeks preceding the assassination for about $179. Well, the Warren Commission said he was not known to have been making that kind of money, and so therefore they must have been mistaken. Well, I say the one thing I've learned in the Army and in the military and working in and around the government is the one thing they're really sticklers about is, I don't care if you are an undercover FBI informant, you have to pay your taxes, okay? So if you figure at that time, if he's making about $200 a month as an undercover agent and they took out the taxes, they'd come to about $179, wouldn't it? That's probably his take-home pay.
Right.
And so, again, that it all fits. But
well, let's jump back to what you and I talked about earlier on this, and that is that if Lee Harvey Oswald turned in the tip to the FBI in Chicago that potentially saved President Kennedy's life, what does that make Lee Harvey Oswald?
Well, first let's carry it on through to Dallas, because according to Judith Very Baker, and there's a wonderful book out now by Ed Haslam telling her story. Well, Haslam worked on it. It's her book, and it's called Me and Lee. And I would encourage everyone with a real deep interest in the assassination to read this, because it explains the very mysterious and largely unknown activities of Lee Harvey Oswald while he was in New Orleans in the summer of 1963.
Well, didn't we have Haslam on the program?
Yes, you did. And as you recall, he told you about the adulteration of the polio vaccine.
Correct.
Get-go. She insisted that her son was working for the United States government. And at the time of the Warren Commission, the Texas Attorney General said, well, we've developed information that he was working as a informant for the FBI.
Yep.
Just like Jack Ruby had been an informant for the FBI. Isn't that something? The man accused of killing the president and the man accused of killing the president's killer both had worked for the FBI. Does that begin to sound kind of familiar? Because anybody who's been keeping up with all the terrorist attacks in the United States, if you'll think about it, always involves a FBI undercover guy, okay? Some kind of snitch, some kind of informant, usually a criminal who they let out of prison or they keep from going to prison in exchange for telling us where the terrorists are. So he goes and rounds up some goofballs, jacks them all up on, let's do something. Yeah, man, okay. Probably gives them booze, gives them money, even builds explosives, gives them the stuff. And then the FBI, luckily for public safety, busts those nasty old terrorists, and the public is stampeded further down the road because of terrorist activity. Same old stuff.
Useful idiots.
Useful idiots.
Yeah, well...
man, and we just keep falling for it, It's just...
Well,
the latest thing, Senator Rand Paul introduces a bill to do away with the TSA. Before they can consider that, there's another attempted underwear bombing, okay?
Yep.
And by the way, everybody, I hope you noticed that this time they made a real point to say, and this was a different type bomb, okay?
This was not. That's right. It wasn't a Haynes bomb. It was a Fruit of the Loom bomb.
It's a Fruit of the Loom. No, but there was a reason why they were careful to point out that this was a different type bomb, because more and more people were becoming aware of the fact that, I'm telling you right now, that the first underwear bomber, Ababoob or whatever his name was, there was never any danger, because although he had this plastique type explosive, PETN, in his underwear, it required a detonator. Yeah. You couldn't set it on fire with a match. You couldn't light it. You couldn't light it with a cigarette lighter. You had to have a detonator, and he didn't have a detonator. In fact, he was walked onto the plane with a well-dressed man who talked him past security, and it later came out in congressional testimony that the underwear bomber was going to be not granted a visa. He would not have been allowed to board that aircraft, but U.S. intelligence agencies forced the State Department to go ahead and issue him a visa and let him on.
They put him on it.
And they put him on there. It was all a put-up deal. It's all so phony
that's why
that it drives me
idiots.
nuts, and this is why I have absolutely no patience with the thieves and perverts and idiots that are manning the TSA. And I use that, I'm not just calling them names.
No, that's what they are.
They have been convicted of stealing. Yeah. They've been convicted of groping people. And
they have prior records, most of them.
They've got
not
prior
most of them.
records.
A lot of them.
They're just, a lot, not all of them, but a lot of them are just scum.
They're dregs.
Okay? And it's like, well, I can hear somebody in the bowels of the White House going, well, what are we going to do with these crumb bums? Let's form the TSA and give them government jobs.
They're actually
Get them off
perfect.
The streets.
They're perfect for the job because nobody with a conscience could do that kind of work.
Yeah, we're getting far afield, though. So, back to Abraham Bolden.
Well, let me go back to the part
in Chicago was thwarted thanks to
somebody named Lee. Now, all right, folks, ding, ding, ding. Somebody named Lee turned in a tip to the FBI that there was going to be an attempt on John F. Kennedy in Chicago. Lee. All right.
Yeah.